Hey guys, welcome back to Hindsight is 2020. I am so glad that you're here for episode 2. If you are new here, welcome. These episodes exist because I believe when we look back on hard things, the painful things, the things that almost broke us, we begin to see them differently. We begin to see the hand of God in places that we thought He was absent. And that's what hindsight does. It gives you clarity that you couldn't access when you were in the middle of it. And as a mentor and a soul restoration coach, I teach from the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because real healing doesn't happen in highlight reels. It happens when somebody is willing to go there, to the hard places, and pull out the truth that was buried underneath all the pain. So today, we're going there. And today I want to talk about Joseph. You can find his story in Genesis chapters 37 through 50. I want to encourage you to read it in full because there's so much in there that we won't even have time to touch today. But what I do want to do is touch on something that God has been revealing to me personally, and I know He wants me to share this with you. Now, Joseph's story and my story are very similar, and I don't say that lightly. Maybe your story is similar too. The betrayal, the people who were supposed to be in your corner becoming your greatest opposition, the seasons of waiting that made no sense, the feeling of being forgotten. And I believe that many of you listening right now can relate to all of this, because here's what I've come to know. There is always a Joseph in the family. Always. There's always the one who sees differently. There's always that person in the family that dreams bigger or carries more, or that person that hears from God in a way that others around them don't. And instead of them being celebrated, it becomes the very thing that makes them a target. And if that's you, this episode is for you. Because today, I want to show you that Joseph was not just a Bible character. Joseph was a narcissistic abuse survivor. And what he did in the middle of that abuse, how he protected himself, how he kept moving, how he came out whole on the other side, I believe it's the blueprint for every single person listening right now. So let's get into it. Now, I told you, Joseph was a survivor of narcissistic abuse. His own brothers, his family, they plotted against him. They schemed. They sat down and ate a meal while he was screaming from the bottom of a pit. That's not sibling rivalry. That's giving calculation. Okay? That's cold. This is textbook narcissism. And yet this man came out completely whole. Not just physically free, not just promoted, but whole on the inside. His mind was intact. His emotions were intact. His will was intact. This man's imagination was intact. His affections were intact. And everything that hell tried to take from him, his soul survived it. So today, I'm not just telling you a Bible story. I'm showing you what it looks like when a person goes through absolute devastation and comes out with their soul still whole. I talk about this all the time. As a soul restoration coach, this is what I always come back to. The soul. Your mind, your will, your emotions, your imagination, and your affections. And here's what I want you to understand today. The soul is the battlefield. It always has been. When you really study scripture, you begin to realize that everything God is doing and everything the enemy is attempting, it's all centered around one thing. Your soul. God is fighting for it. The enemy is fighting against it. And you are standing in the middle of that war, sometimes not even realizing what's really at stake. Because a person whose soul is fractured cannot walk in purpose. A person whose soul is fractured, they can't hear God clearly. They can't dream. They can't love without fear. They can't move forward without looking over their shoulder. A broken soul is a contained person. And the enemy knows that. But today, I want to show you somebody who went through absolute hell, betrayal, abandonment, false accusations, years of waiting, and came out on the other side with every part of his soul still whole. And when I look at Joseph, I really look at Joseph. What I see isn't just a great Bible story. What I see is a man whose soul was under one of the most relentless attacks recorded in Scripture. And yet, God won. We know He won because of what Joseph looked like on the other side of this. We know He won because his mind was sound. Joseph's emotions were regulated. His will was surrendered to God. His imagination was still full of vision. His affections were still pointed towards heaven, and every part of his soul came out whole. And I want to show you 3 traits that made that possible. The first trait is that Joseph knew who he was. Joseph was the youngest, not the most experienced, not the most qualified by human standards. He didn't have no seminary degree. But Joseph carried a level of clarity and discernment that his older brothers just didn't. And maybe that's you. Maybe you're the youngest in your family. Maybe you're the youngest on your job. Maybe you're the youngest in your friend group or in your ministry. But you know things. You see things. You carry wisdom that people twice your age are still searching for. And instead of being celebrated, you became a target. Now, here's what's really happening with his brother psychologically. See, there is a concept called identity erosion. It's when a person has no solid internal foundation. When they don't, they begin to define themselves entirely by external things like their position or their status or comparison. They're more focused on who gets the most attention, who sits at the top. See, Joseph's brothers had no real sense of who they were. So when Joseph showed up carrying something that they didn't have, it didn't just make them jealous, it made them feel like nothing. And that is the root of narcissism. It's not strength, it's a deep sense of emptiness. And the reason why Joseph knew who he was is because he knew who God was. He had proximity to God that his brothers didn't have. See, their unhealed wounds created spiritual static. They had bitterness. They were competitive. They had unresolved pain. And all of that created noise that drowned out the voice of God and left them spiritually deaf to their own identity. Now watch this, because this is where the soul comes in. See, the soul begins in the mind. What you believe about yourself becomes the foundation of everything else. Joseph's mind was anchored in what God said about him, not what his brothers said, not what his circumstances showed, and not what the pit felt like. And this is important because narcissistic abuse is a direct assault on the mind. You know, it's gaslighting, manipulation, constant criticism. All of it is designed to make you question your own reality. It's to erode your sense of self until you can't tell what's true anymore. But Joseph never let his brothers rewrite his story. He knew who he was before they came for him, and he knew who he was after. A person who doesn't know who they are will always feel threatened by a person who does. It's not just about personality conflict or not getting along or whatever you want to call it. This is a spiritual deficit that showed up as persecution. Now, the second thing that we see in Joseph, the second trait that we see in Joseph, is that he knew what he carried. Joseph had a dream. He had a God-given vision so clear and so big that when he described it to his brothers, they wanted to kill him. Now, have you ever shared your dream with somebody, the wrong person, and you watched their whole entire face change? You told somebody where God was taking you, and instead of excitement, you got silence or criticism or who do you think you are? That was Joseph. And hear me when I say this. When a person has given up on their own potential, watching somebody else walk freely in theirs is unbearable. It doesn't just produce a jealousy in somebody, it produces rage because your dream becomes a mirror that forces them to confront everything they chose not to become. And here's what narcissistic abuse specifically does to the soul. It causes gift suppression. Now, through constant criticism and gaslighting and control, the narcissist conditions you to stop trusting what you carry. So your imagination, the part of your soul that holds vision and possibility, well, that gets shut down. Your affections, the part of your soul that loves and hopes and reaches towards God, that gets redirected towards just surviving. You stop dreaming. You stop creating. You shrink. You go silent. And what some people call peace, it's really just successful suppression of your soul. See, Joseph could have done that. After the pit, he could have let that dream go. After slavery, he could have just buried the vision, okay? After prison, he could have decided God wasn't real, but his imagination stayed alive. His affection stayed pointed toward God. Joseph kept dreaming. He kept interpreting. He kept connecting to heaven, even in the darkest places. Because you cannot kill a dream that God breathed into a soul that stays connected to him. The pit could not kill it. The prison could not kill it. And what God placed in your soul is greater than anything they tried to do to you too. Now here's the third trait that God revealed to me about Joseph. See, Joseph knew where God was taking him. This is deep, y'all, because knowing who you are is one thing. Knowing what you carry is another thing. But holding on to where God is taking you when your circumstances look nothing like the promise, now that requires something that most people never fully develop. It requires a surrendered will and regulated emotions, y'all. Joseph spent years in places that made no sense for somebody with his assignment. He was in a pit. Joseph was in slavery in a prison. He was forgotten by the very person he helped. And Joseph was human, and he felt all of it. There were moments in that prison where I believe he wept, where maybe he questioned, where the weight was almost just too much. And here's the difference between Joseph and somebody whose soul gets shattered by trauma. Joseph felt his emotions without being controlled by them. Now that is emotional regulation. And it's one of the most powerful things a healed soul can do. Now I want to speak to survivors specifically here. Narcissistic abuse rewires your nervous system for chaos. Your emotions become either completely shut down or completely overwhelming, because the toxic environment trains your soul to react instead of respond. But Joseph, he responded. Even in a prison, he served. He interpreted dreams for other prisoners. He stayed present and he stayed excellent. Not because he was hurting, but because his will was surrendered to something bigger than his pain. See, when your will is aligned with God's will, you can endure places that would break somebody whose will is only connected to comfort. And here's where the revelation ties it all together. God allowed every dark place not to punish Joseph, but to position him. See, the pit got him to Egypt. Prison got him to Pharaoh. Every dead end was a divine corridor. And every person who tried to bury him was unknowingly planting him. The same is true for you. And the same is true for me. The dark season that you went through was not wasted. The compassion that you carry now came from pain. The discernment that you walk in now, that came from being deceived. The boundaries you have now came from not having none. You didn't just survive. God was using it to build a soul that could carry what he was about to place on you. And when Joseph finally stood before his brothers who threw him in the pit, with every reason and every resource to destroy them, he wept and he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." That's in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. That is not a broken man. That is not a bitter man. That is a man with a whole soul. This is a man with a sound mind, a man with regulated emotions, a man with a surrendered will and an imagination still full of vision. Okay? God won. So, let me land this plane right here. The soul is the battlefield. It always has been. And everything Joseph walked through, the pit, the slavery, the false accusation, the prison, every single attack was designed to do one thing. It was to fracture his soul. Those attacks were meant to silence him, to contain him, to keep him from becoming who God already said he was. But guess what? It didn't work, because Joseph came out with his mind sound. His will was surrendered, his emotions were regulated, his imagination was alive, and his affections was still locked in on God. That man came out whole. And that is exactly what God is doing in you right now. Even in the waiting, even in the confusion, even in the places that make no sense. God is not wasting a single moment of what you've been through. He's restoring every part of your soul that the enemy tried to take, piece by piece and layer by layer. Now, that is not just theology, y'all. That is a promise. And now, listen, if you are coming out of a narcissistic, abusive, or toxic relationship, and you're trying to figure out where you even are in your healing journey right now, I want to help you with that. I have a free soul assessment that I created specifically for people walking through this journey. It's going to give you a clear picture of where your soul is right now. It's going to show you where healing still needs to happen. It's completely free, and you can download it right now. The link is in the description. And if you're ready to go a little bit deeper, if you're ready to stop trying to figure this out alone, I do have openings for one-on-one coaching sessions. You can book a free 20-minute clarity call with me, and y'all, we can get on a Zoom together and talk about where you are and where God is trying to take you. That link is also in the description. So for those of you who are listening right now, you didn't come across this episode by accident. Joseph wasn't chosen because he was perfect. He was chosen because he was available to God, available to the process, available to trust that the pit was not the end of his story. And neither is yours. The enemy thought he won when he threw Joseph in that pit. He thought he won when they sold him. He thought he won when they locked him up and forgot about him. But God had the final word. The Most High God has the final word over your life and my life too. See, your soul is worth fighting for, and God has been fighting for it all along. Now it's your turn to fight for it too. And hey, if anything stood out to you, if something hit you deeply or resonated with you or helped you see yourself differently, I want to hear from you. Drop in the comments, y'all. Let me know what God is saying to you through this message. I read every single one. I respond to every single one. I want to thank you guys for staying to the end and finishing episode 2 of Hindsight is 2020. And I will see you all in the next one. I love you. Bye.